Thanks, Senator Blumenthal. Next is the former chairman of the Immigration Subcommittee of Senate Judiciary and now the ranking member, Senator from California, Senator Padilla.
Thank you, Senator Durbin. Congressmember Raskin, thank you for your leadership and your voice and your friendship as well. And thank you to all the witnesses for making the time to be here and for your courage to speak up and to speak out. Now, over the years, I've seen my Republican colleagues express serious concerns about states' rights, states' authority, right? Just a fundamental construct in our Constitution. They speak about the need to stop the federal government from overreach on a whole host of issues. They've talked about guns. They've talked about education. They've talked about a woman's autonomy and choices over her own body. They've talked about vaccinations, you name it. But as we sit here today, we witness a Trump administration and a Donald Trump that is running roughshod over states that he disagrees with. And it's been curiously quiet on the other side of the aisle right now. I wonder to myself, where's the outrage over Donald Trump's threat to withhold funds from states but just based on any particular item of his agenda that a state disagrees with? Where's the outrage when the Trump administration ignores the law about spending levels that Congress, on a bipartisan basis, authorized and acted upon? Where's the outrage when the president seeks to make it harder for eligible citizens to register and to vote? Where's the outrage when the president sends armed forces into a state, into communities domestically, over the objections of the governor of that state, let alone local mayors and local law enforcement, all in order to stoke tensions that have already been heightened after a series of increasingly aggressive, performative, cruel immigration raids in places like restaurants, agricultural fields, construction sites. Shouldn't have to wait for this to happen in your state, colleagues, before we speak up, because you know very well that it's happening in mine. But this is what we're seeing. And again, silence on the other side. Just to speak to California for a second, the state that I'm proud to represent, California contributes about $83 billion more in funding to the federal treasury than it receives. We are a donor state, more than any other state in the nation, yet the Trump administration threatens to strip funds from my state, along with all the states represented by the people around this table. It's as outrageous as it is un-American. And so I want to hear more about just what that would mean for the country if he follows through with that. Attorney General Campbell. Now, Massachusetts has joined California in arguing that the Trump administration cannot strip federal funding based on a state's immigration-related policies. Now, we know it's the job of the federal government to enforce immigration law, not the job of states or local governments, but Massachusetts, California, others have adopted immigrant-friendly policies at times in the interest of our communities, in the interest of our economy, in the interest of public health and more. Now, late last week, you secured a victory in one of those lawsuits. Can you just explain that particular case? Can you explain the kinds of funds that the Trump administration is trying to withhold and what that withholding of funds would mean for community?
Thank you, Senator. And of course, we would all want to acknowledge A.G. Bonta, who is a part of this coalition. We work closely with him on a regular basis. And I went to UCLA Law School, so I also have to give them a shout out at UCLA. So A.G. Raoul mentioned this earlier. So whether it's it's almost twofold. You have the administration intentionally seeking to cut funding unlawfully, whether in the context of public health, our libraries, cultural institutions, public safety grants, you name it, just unlawfully cut them. Then you have this other category where they are conditioning the monies on something that we are doing or not doing. In this case, it was them wanting us to advance certain type of immigration policy within our states and attempting to bully us, frankly, to implement the cruel and fear-mongering immigration policies that we're seeing from this administration, including in the ways in which ICE is showing up in our communities in our respective states, or to attach other conditions to the grants. DEI, for example, we've been reminding folks that DEIA policies are lawful. And they are attempting to tell folks, no, we're going to take your money away if you're doing those policies or implementing DEIA policies, or we're going to take your transportation funding away or your FEMA funding away if you're not doing our immigration enforcement for us, or some other unlawful policy based on some ideology that they hold as an administration. So in this most recent case, we won. A judge essentially said, you cannot do that. And I think this was a preliminary injunction. We have preliminary injunctions, TROs, but this was a preliminary injunction where they could not condition funding for FEMA or certain transportation funding on bullying the states to advance certain type of immigration policy, which we've seen in other contexts too, and we've also won there as well.
Great. Let the victories continue. And it shouldn't be a question, but it has become one. I mean, up until this administration and this president, you would never conceive of the notion of a president of an executive branch of the federal government not complying with court orders. But here we are. Just as a follow-up to your responses, a question for Attorney General Plotkin. You said in your testimony that freezing these funds is making your citizens less safe. And I understand there was a very passionate response to a question on this topic from Senator Klobuchar. Can you speak a little bit more of how the administration's actions have made it harder for state and local law enforcement to do its job?
Yes, well, first of all, Senator, thank you for your leadership and for your bravery. I would note just really quickly in response to your last question, there is one former state attorney general in Washington who once led a coalition of 26 states up to the Supreme Court advocating against federal government's ability to coerce states through spending, and her name is Pam Bondi. I think with respect to your question, this going to what I said earlier, Senator, this is an administration that touts law and order. I would candidly put our states and the states in our coalition's public safety records up against any of the states that are not part of our coalition. When you look at gun violence, rates of domestic violence, human trafficking, drug trafficking, our approach to law enforcement is working. 2 years running with record low numbers of shootings in New Jersey. How do we do that? Well, we've had really close partnerships across federal, state, and local governments. We funded things like license plate reader technology, which the Trump administration is cutting. We've put law enforcement on the street. We've empowered them to focus on the crimes that we want to prevent. This administration has done the opposite. They've cut funding for law enforcement. They've attacked law enforcement officers. They've made coordination across state, county, and local and federal government law enforcement weaker than it's been at any point, I think, since 9/11. And the result of that is the people in our states are less safe. If we're not coordinating and sharing information effectively, people get hurt. And we've seen it in real cases. And I would implore the federal government to do, frankly, even what it did in the first Trump administration, which is separate politics from law enforcement, and in many respects. And that is not happening right now. And I think the upshot here is you're going to see crime potentially go up, and the blame should be on the parties that are not actively trying to work with law enforcement to keep our community safe.
Yeah. Thank you. And just a couple comments in closing. I know my time is up, but I think 2 points that I believe are important for this record. Number one, to your last point, that's been the situation, the concern, frankly, in Los Angeles these last couple of weeks, between the increasingly, cruel and extreme ICE raids and detention, immigration enforcement actions, et cetera. But the way the administration has gone about it raises the tensions in Los Angeles, or the objections of local leadership and local law enforcement, the federalization of National Guard troops and deployment into our communities. And as the protests, which have been by and large peaceful, but we know folks who exploit protests on sensitive issues, different crowd of folks that caused the vandalism and the looting, et cetera. Even as that was dissipating, this administration further escalates by sending in the Marines. What I hear from local law enforcement is that it makes the job of local law enforcement harder because there's no communication, no coordination. So not only is it unnecessary, it's frankly counterproductive and putting general public and law enforcement officials in danger. Number one. Number two, a moment just to clarify for the record what sanctuary policy is and what sanctuary policy isn't. And I apologize if this was covered in the hearing already, but I think there's a big either misunderstanding, intentionally or unintentionally, of what sanctuary policy represents, because that's what the administration is holding against the state of California and so many others. All sanctuary means is a state or a local jurisdiction would not commit their state or local resources for the enforcement of federal immigration laws. It is the job of the federal government to enforce federal laws, not state and locals to do that work. Does it mean that the federal government can't come into a state or into a state? Of course not. But the job of local law enforcement is public safety. And it is, based on my experience, and if any of you disagree, hurtful to public safety if somebody, depending on their immigration status, legal or documented or otherwise, chooses not to come forward and report a crime because of that concern. Or if they've been witnesses or have information to a crime, they will not come forward with that information because of their fear. I see heads nodding in the affirmative, so I don't see any disagreement. But I think it's important for the purposes of this hearing, for the purposes of the deliberations of this Congress, to lay that out. And I will end with this, because it just happens to be Los Angeles right now, just happens to be California right now, just happens to be a conversation about immigrant rights and due process right now. But this administration, including the Secretary of Homeland Security, has not been shy about what they perceive as their, quote, mission: to liberate Los Angeles from the governor and from the mayor. It is a dangerous notion when an administration believes it is their job or that of the military to determine which duly elected governors and mayors can lead their constituents. That's part of what we're speaking up against, but a reflection of the tone that this administration chooses to create. So again, thank you all for being here. Thank you for
Thank
your
you, Senator
service,
Padilla.
your leadership.